Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on this fast-forward planet, which despite all the what feels like freedom and even relaxation in the United States and some other countries, soccer stadiums and baseball stadiums are full, and this virus is not taking a break. And as I keep pointing out on our World in Data website, there are still about 7 billion people with a B who have not been fully vaccinated. It's basically, what is that? It's about, only 12% of humanity has been fully vaccinated at this point. So anyone surprised about new variants popping up shouldn't be surprised. We deal with those kinds of issues here all the time. Today on Sustain What, we're going to focus on young people moving into the corporate arena in ways that they hope can fit all of our aspirations and profit motives into the reality that we live on a finite planet and that is deeply unjust in some ways as well. We're going to focus on the honorees, the 30 under 30 leaders working to prove planet, profit, and justice can coexist. This is they've just been honored in a 6 years and counting enterprise by Greenbiz, which is a media group and that does events and publications aimed at accelerating a just transition to a clean economy. Can't ask for much more than that. And clean can have a climate context as well. A functioning, safe world where people can still thrive and have food on their plates and energy where they need it and the like. I'm Andy Revkin at the Earth Institute and Climate School of Columbia University. And here we go. I've been on a bit of a break because I'm about to launch a writing enterprise and just sort of slowed down on these, but we're here. And Heather Clancy is with us here to start with Zach Angelini, who's at Timberland. Heather is a vice president at Greenbiz. And I think we'll start with just a quick review of Greenbiz and this effort, this 30 under 30 effort. So, and greetings to you both, wherever you are. I think you're in Maryland today, Heather?
I am in Maryland today, yep. And thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. And Zach, you're in New Hampshire.
Yep, that's right. Yes, thanks for having me.
With Timberland.
Excited to be here.
Great. Well, let's start with Heather a little bit, just on the context, and tell folks a little bit about who you are and how this 30 under 30 project got going at Greenbiz.
Yeah, so I like my other title better at Greenbiz, of the editorial director. So I focus on our coverage of this community, the corporate sustainability community, and sort of the ecosystem around that, startups and NGO, nonprofit organizations, and everyone sort of getting the business sector involved with contributing to sustainability instead of being the bad actors, trying to be at least better actors. We know everyone's not perfect, and so that's what we focus on. 30 under 30 project, as you mentioned, is 6 years old. It was when we started it, it was really just our vision to focus on the rising talent in this field, the folks that are coming into it from the college level and from the high school level and so forth. Many people in the corporate sustainability careers kind of moved into this space, like the older folks, if you will, people of a certain age like me, got into it as a second kind of career or moved from other places. But the folks on our 30 under 30 list have been living with this, and it's been part of their sensibility since a very young age. So we have a lot to learn from them, and that was our goal, is to identify and highlight these individuals. And it's gotten more and more difficult, I'm happy to say, to pick this group every year. At the beginning, it was sort of like, hey, we got to find younger folks, and now we get like hundreds of applications and nominations. So it's a really gratifying project.
And what have you learned? I noticed you've done kind of a review the bidding thing. The science editor at the Times, when I was working at the New York Times, she used to say, now let's review the bidding. Where are we? How are we doing? And so what's your general sense of how this is playing out as these cohorts have moved forward in time?
So I think the biggest change for me since the beginning cohort is that, and Zach can probably talk to this a lot better than me, but the roles of those on the list. So you don't have to have sustainability in your title to be really focused on better resource management, picking materials that are not going to be staying around for hundreds of years, dealing with emissions in your own energy operation as sort of just a fundamental business strategy. So for me, the biggest change has been that, number one, people are integrated into the entire organization. So they have supply chain titles and pick your title. And then the other thing that I would say is that we have a lot more, we're getting more and more diversity on this list, which diversity continues to be a big challenge for this corporate sustainability profession. But I think we definitely had a wake up call last year, and this list is more diverse than it has been in the past. So those are the two big changes for me.
Well, that diversity inclusion issue is hardly unique in the corporate sustainability business world. At Columbia University, about 2 years ago, a woman who was Coeli Dutt, who had been running diversity efforts at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, part of the climate school. This is before George Floyd and all that. She had come out with a paper in the journal Nature showing through data that essentially the blackness of earth sciences had not changed in 40 years. 40 years. And in journalism, of course, we're going through the same. So journalism is a business too, and everyone's working on these same questions. So there's one more slide here. Yeah, I mean, I started digging in on this in my reporting. The Times, when I was at the Times, we had all business reporters and lots of people working on aspects of this question. And on my blog, I dug in a little bit. I got some sense of hope, especially because of transparency, global transparency, the ability to monitor supply chains using all kinds of data from the ground, from the air. When I see Harold Rickenbacker is here from Environmental Defense Fund. Hey, Harold.
Hey, Harold.
Hey there. Good morning. I apologize for the delay.
No worries.
I hate that this Zoomified world requires everyone to be like this. No, it's just great to have you here.
A bio break or something. Get up and take a stretch human break.
Yeah, and congratulations. Taylor Price from Aptar will be coming in a little while. I think Elisabeth Anna Resch from the UN Global Compact had an emergency with her dog, so she'll hopefully be caring for him and provide some good news later. But it's great to have you all here. I was just talking about at the Times through from like 2012 onward, I was reporting increasingly on efforts like Global Fishing Watch, Global Forest Watch. Just 3 days ago, I was on a call with folks from Peru, Amazon tribe, working with satellite data and with outside partners, so that you have almost real-time capacity to report on intrusions, gold mining coming into an Indian reserve and the like. That feels very promising to me. That plus what I do sense is a culture emerging in young people, particularly, of really understanding these larger layers of, that fiduciary responsibility, if you're on a board, isn't just about money. It's about value, right? So maybe let's get into this. There are a couple of questions I wanted to ask the honorees as a starting point, and one basically for Zach and then for Harold, if you can give like a sort of elevator sketch of how you got to be who you are so far. I know that's hard.
In like 1 minute or less.
So it's not an elevator pitch. It's like, how did you become who you are so far? And like, was there some key moment that made that happen? And maybe we'll start with Zach at Timberland and just give us a little bit of a picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied environmental engineering in school, and during the course of getting my undergrad and grad degree, had different internship and research experiences where one working in with the Australian government to learn how to respond to oil spills, and also measuring marine debris in that region of the world. And then in Ghana, looking at addressing the energy crisis. And in both of those experiences, I really started to feel like, all right, we're either measuring an environmental problem or we're working on addressing an environmental problem after the fact, both which are obviously incredibly important pieces of the puzzle. But for me, I felt like I really wanted to get on the inside and at the root of where these problems were originating, which was big business. And so that really led me to get interested in corporate social responsibility. And when I kind of came back from that research experience and was finishing my degree, used to some of...
Sorry. That was an accident on my part. Sorry. You're still here.
Okay, cool. Started to learn about the work that Timberland was doing in this space of corporate social responsibility, and just that they had that mindset. And I felt like that would be a great opportunity to kind of get on the inside, push that further, and then really make that work to make that successful for the business so that it could be an example for other businesses. And then in that way, we kind of create change on the inside, from the inside.
That's great that early experience got you focused on the basically the systems approach to a problem, not just mopping it up. Like what were the conditions that led to the marine debris or the like? Did you say Australia? You didn't. I couldn't quite tell if you said Australia or Austria. I assume it was Australia.
Australia, yeah.
Yeah, very briefly, when I was in my early 20s, I was on a sailboat. I'd signed on to crew on this boat going around the world, believe it or not. And the northern end of the northernmost part of Australia, the Cape York Peninsula, heading up toward New Guinea.
Okay.
We were going around there. We stopped at an uninhabited island. The beach was full of marine debris. This is 1979. Exactly. It was mostly fishing gear. It was mostly lost fishing gear. And I have a picture I could show later and that was one of my wake-up calls that got me focused on maybe thinking about being a journalist. So that's great that you're carrying that forward. I have a question about the industry you're in now that we can go back to. But Harold, so how did you become you so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had to reflect on how I became myself, right? But similar to Zach, studied engineering in undergrad. So I studied at South Carolina State University, which is a historically Black college and university in my hometown in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And those who know the engineering discipline, civil engineering more specifically, is really broad, right? So you have transportation engineering, structural, highway, and environmental within the specific discipline. I had a unique opportunity to attend a Toyota Go Green conference when I was an undergrad, which literally introduced me to the environmental sustainability field. And I saw that there was obviously need for environmental specialists, environmental consultants, environmental management as we approach the impacts of climate change and global warming. But it also showed the projection of the jobs, and it felt like a sustainable decision to go into the environmental field. With that being said, I pursued a PhD in environmental engineering at the University of Pittsburgh. Had a unique opportunity to work at the intersection of community engagement and environmental engineering, which is really unique. Most engineering disciplines, as you can imagine, in less cases are hands-on and have community engagement elements to the work. But I uniquely had an opportunity to really work at a nonprofit and be in more of an EJ organizing role and doing engineering consultations in communities. So actually testing the air quality in homes and providing different mitigation or remediation procedures for different residents. With that being said, I realized that there were a lot of issues beyond the scope of my project and beyond the scope of being an engineer at an academic institution, which gave me the opportunity or gave me the interest in figuring out how I could have more of a global impact. With that being said, I applied to a job at the Environmental Defense Fund, which really has a more policy-oriented and global approach to the work. So it went from me being really community-driven and bottom-up in some of my approaches at the University of Pittsburgh to really figuring out from a top-down approach how I can have an impact on communities. So, that's literally where I am today, working closely with organizations, EJ partners, as well as academics in different city governments and ways to identify air pollution exposure and working on public health interventions in some of those same communities.
And, as we were saying earlier, the diversity issue has been a huge one. I did a little work with EDF way back in 1990, 91, after my first book. The book back there on global warming was with their the exhibition they helped to organize at the American Museum of Natural History. It was the first museum exhibit on global warming. At that period, in that period, Blackness, color generally was just not there in all of these arenas. And I assume, and this is even as people like Robert Bullard were building the case through data of Black communities being, ground zero for the impacts of environmental negligence. So I assume it's great to see you here, for one thing. And I don't know how valuable you feel that is do you work to, how do we have more of that from your standpoint? How does that work? And not feel like people like our generation are letting you or enabling people of color to come into something. It has to be different than that, I think, to me.
Right. Yeah, no, you raised some great points. And, to be fair, I think it's a lack of introduction to environmental consciousness and environmental sustainability in a lot of these communities. As I outlined, as a person of color, it wasn't until I actually went to graduate school or attended a conference outside of my immediate circle and my personal career goals that I was introduced to the field. But then as I have been introduced, it just makes immediate connection, and it just makes sense as we think about quality of life and pursuit of happiness and making sure these communities thrive. You raised a point that Dr. Biller and some of his great work, and we've seen in the literature where people of color, low wealth communities live closer to many legacy source points and also in higher concentrations, right? So it has a clear impact and linkage to our health and well-being. And again, this is just not an everyday conversation. Unfortunately, it's often had in academic spaces at the conferences where we need to put this information and content in the hands of the people who are being impacted so that they can be advocates for their health and well-being. So part of it, again, is just introducing these concepts. If that's in the shape of literally being involved in different schools, I've worked in capacity of again, doing literally trainings and workshops to increase consciousness on these issues with our youth. But again, how do we do it in frontline communities at different community-based organizations and nonprofits where we can create advocates over the course of their lives?
Yeah, thank you for that. So let's focus on the corporate arena itself. EDF has taken a lot of heat from other environmental groups, even when back then in the late 80s. I remember, I don't think I wrote about it, but there was the McDonald's work on packaging for burgers and stuff like that. And there was some more traditional greens were attacking EDF even then for having this sort of, I think they called it a third wave approach to environmentalism. And more recently, I was reporting creditably on the work on methane, which for EDF, they realized that if you really want to get clarity and solutions on reducing leakage of gas from oil and gas facilities, you have to get to the facilities. You can't just do it with satellites, even though you're also helping launch a satellite. And that requires cooperation. But again, sometimes that gets hammered. But to me, it's essential. So what do you think about that aspect of how EDF is working? I think it's a positive one. Some people see it the other way.
Yeah, I've been at EDF for going on 2 years now, and I actually work on our Plus Business program. So although I don't work directly on some of our methane campaigns and on our oil and gas work, I am familiar with some of those projects. And it comes to it, we're thinking about it from a circular economy or systems lens, right? The life cycle impacts of many industries, right? If that's the scope 1 through 3 emissions, ultimately impact communities. With that being said, you naturally have to partner with corporations to have an overall impact on the urban air quality in a specific airshed, the water quality in that specific region. So undoubtedly, I'd love to mention that our corporate partnerships really allow us to thrive and strive for environmental equality. And you see initially a lot of momentum in the ESG space, especially among investors. So naturally, you will have no choice but to be involved and work more closely with corporations on their supply chain management, because again, it's the systems impact, and it's not just the emissions at a specific facility, but again, thinking about it from a life cycle perspective, there's tons of impacts that we can have working closely with those corporations.
There's that word, systems. My wife incidentally teaches teachers how to teach sustainability and it's basically teaching systems thinking and systems doing. Systems thinking is easier than systems doing.
Hey, Andrew, I'd love to add something here about
of course.
something that EDF does. It's really, I think, really instrumental in this whole discussion is the Climate Corps program. There's been a ton of 30 under 30 nominees or honorees over the years who have been part of that program. They go, these are college students or people doing their masters that get embedded for an internship at a company for summer to help them sort out a problem. It's very data driven. It's very focused on bringing a business lens to a problem. And that program, I think, has been super beneficial in helping pull people into the field, but also in helping companies realize the value of partnering authentically with the nonprofit groups around. I mean, because I think to your point you're raising earlier, there is a lot of skepticism, and the pendulum is definitely swinging to the green, concern over greenwashing right now, and what are these relationships really doing, and what are they really delivering? And I think that skepticism is good, but I am so with you, Harold. Like it's going to take everyone working together to get this done.
Absolutely, and I see Taylor Price has joined us now. Hold on a second.
Hey, Taylor.
Hi, Taylor.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
Great to have you here today. So where in the world are you, just to start with?
Yeah, I'm in North Carolina in the Raleigh-Durham area. So.
Great part of the world. Well, hopefully, it's pretty hot here in the Hudson Valley.
Everywhere.
I know. Well, here we go, Taylor, what I've done so far is ask each of the honorees a quick question. It's a way to get to know you a little bit for people who haven't had time to look up the information. It's sort of like a quick sketch, the equivalent of an elevator pitch, but not a pitch. In other words, how did you get to be who you are so far? And was there any turn of the road that brought you to this particular focus in your career?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I've always been kind of a science lover. I was the kid that would ask for, a rock tumbler or a microscope or something like that for Christmas. So that's always kind of been something that I've been interested in, and was really lucky to have some kind of amazing teachers along the way who really kind of helped me develop that skill. And so in high school, was really thinking everyone that's interested in science goes in to be, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, something like that. And was kind of lucky to have a great high school teacher in my senior year for AP Environmental Science. And everyone wanted to take his class because you got to go on field trips and go outside. And we went to the nuclear power plant and everything. But that really kind of opened my world to environmentalism as a field, and really learning about those, kind of problems that everyone in the world shares and how can we really make a difference there. So when I got to college, I was here in North Carolina, went to UNC Chapel Hill and did environmental studies there. And one of my big interests was how do we bring other people kind of on that journey of environmentalism. So really was focused on the environmental education, working at the botanical garden, things like that, especially with kind of students, families in the community. So after graduation, I did an AmeriCorps program helping other students get to college and kind of find their path after college. But I knew I wanted to go back to that environmental piece. And really, how can we help kind of those communities, but pull in, lots of different resources as well. And while I was in graduate school, I was really thinking about kind of the scalability. It was great to really work with individuals and communities and one-on-one and see, their eyes light up when they heard something new. But, how could we scale that and really make some really big impact there? So that's when I was really interested in the intersection of kind of policy and economics and business and the environment, because I wanted to have more than just that one-on-one kind of impact. So, now lucky to be in a big global company. It's a packaging company, but really our big thing is we just kind of transform our solutions solutions into things that touch people's daily life. So from pharmaceuticals to food and beverage to beauty and home care, really having that impact across the globe, especially as we work with some of the big customers that I'm sure we all know and love, but how can we make that impact on that big scale? And so it's kind of lucky to fall into that company and continue to make kind of that big impact, and then personally continue to work on that community level too.
That's so amazing. I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Maybe Taylor, I don't know if you have earbuds handy, or let's see if it keeps going. Anyway, so far it's not happening now. We're good. So I'm pulling this up because, we all talk about global sustainability. We talk about SDGs, whether it's within a company or EDF working with partners. And there are just so many, there's 150 plus sub goals, and it all becomes a weird tangle. These are just a few of the 500 visualizations of sustainability, essentially, that a guy has been analyzing. There's a Samuel Mann. He's a computer scientist. So how do you keep traction? It's just from each of you in your where you are now working. And Heather, you can jump in on this too. How do you find the traction points when, as we said, the important part about systems thinking is it's the way the world works. The hard part about it is, how do you then measure, evaluate, and work on tweaks? And I'd like to circle back to Zach. I had this conversation. Well, it was a presentation in DC probably 4 years ago. There was a high-level sustainability guy from Nike, another apparel and shoe company, and he was talking about the work they do. And I brought up this question of scale again. I said, in the world of guitars, for example, there's Taylor Guitar, which is pretty big, but it's not like the giant companies. And they had worked finally to get a source of ebony, that black wood, for the fingerboards and guitars. I'm a guitarist too. And that was where they had reliable, sustainable supply. But it's a small company. So I asked the guy, in the world of shoes, how does that translate to the giantness of Nike, or the giantness of Gibson or guitar? And he said, it's tough. He said, we do A/B testing on products, and actually they found that the word sustainability on a new sneaker actually makes it less desirable. People don't want it. So oh my God, that feels like a frontier or something to keep you up at night. So I want to ask each of you, in the context of this tangly nature of sustainability, in the context of a job, in a world of, eagerness for measurability, what do you focus on? And Zach, so maybe you could talk about that. What does this look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so we went through a pretty extensive process over the past 2 years to kind of answer this question for Timberland and look at, out of all the different sustainable solutions and issues that we could address, where are we best positioned to create change? And that landed us where we are today with our 2030 goals, which really, when we did this assessment and looked at the data, we knew for a fact that the majority of our impact is embedded in the products that we make. So in the shoes and apparel as just a consumer goods company. And then drilling down further into that, the majority of that product impact is really embedded in the natural materials that we use. Because we, as a business, our top volume materials are mostly natural materials. It's leather, cotton, and rubber. And so what we found there was that we had a major opportunity to lean into the agricultural stage of our supply chain and create significant change there, especially through regenerative agriculture. So all of this kind of research led us to kind of our umbrella goal, which is for our products to actually deliver a net positive impact on the earth. Really, this idea is based on kind of the idea that sustainability isn't enough. Basically, to sustain means to keep things as they are. We know that the environment today is already in a severely degraded state. And so our goal shouldn't just be to sustain that, especially when we have this very real and powerful opportunity to actually heal and restore the environments that we're sourcing from. And so that's kind of the vision, is that those net positive products. And then the two big ways that we're getting there are designing our products for circularity. So that's using recycled materials on the front end, but then also ensuring that those materials are designed into the products in a way that maintains their recyclability, so that that Timberland circle of life can continue on. And then when it comes to our natural materials, and this is probably where I focus most of my time, we've set the goal for 100% of our natural materials to be sourced from regenerative agriculture, so that we actually embed those environmental benefits into our supply chain. It's really like the formula is basically circularity reduces our negative impacts, regenerative increases the positive benefits we can deliver, so that we net out in this positive space where we're actually giving back more than we take. And so that's kind of where we landed. And it's definitely, for me, I think I'm just obsessed with this idea of regenerative agriculture, because to me, it's really like an inherently hopeful concept. I think a lot of sustainability can be kind of doom and gloom. And with regenerative agriculture and the data we've seen, it's really saying like, this is mission possible. We can actually reverse kind of the damage that's been happening and participate in becoming more alive of the world, rather than just making it less degraded. And I think that's just like a really exciting and engaging thing, both for us internally, and then we're also seeing great indicators from consumer research that some of the challenges that we face getting people engaged with sustainability, you can actually jump past with this idea of regenerative agriculture, because it's a much more active, engaging idea, just less exciting to be, oh, we're going to make something less bad. It's a lot more exciting to be like, we're going to actually make it better and be part of this like beautification of the world and making it more abundant. We see that actually can have a lot more emotional resonance with people. And to me, that's even more exciting, because that means there's so much more potential to like really start and catalyze a movement that grows quickly beyond Timberland and our own consumers.
Yeah, you've latched onto an ethos that's been pushed now by Paul Hawkins for a long time. I don't know if you read his stuff, but he has a new book coming out. I had a feeling, and I think it's probably common for
very influential.
He was the pioneer who created drawdown and moved on to regeneration. It's his new. I'm going to have him on the show in September when the book comes out. But that idea, and a big part of what he does is try to flip the narrative. The narrative is a word that sometimes feels cheap or false, in the sense that it's just words. But narrative really matters. I think, Taylor, maybe from your standpoint, companies face this big challenge, as I said, of credibility always, partially just because of history. The 20th century meme was corporate villain, and the 21st century doesn't necessarily have to have that same meme. It was a long time coming through the Industrial Revolution and labor strife and environmental despoliation. But do you feel there's some reality to this prospect? And then over to you, Harold.
Yeah, for sure. I can jump in a little bit here. I think it's really interesting, especially for me, kind of being in a manufacturing industry as well. And we're definitely seeing that kind of shift of tides, and companies, talking more openly about sustainability, the positives, and even now, I think maybe the negatives. I think one thing that we've seen in the past is that, companies only wanted to talk about the great things that they were doing and not the challenges. And so we've got a lot of, instances of greenwashing or, getting those environmental groups on board or having that consumer pushback because no one was really talking about where the challenges were. And that's something, that's been really interesting, especially kind of having a more environmental background is able to kind of pinpoint those strategies and those challenges within the organization and saying, hey, it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to collaborate within your value chain and kind of make sure you have the right people in place and different things like that. And that's something that we've really tried to do a lot at Aptar. I've been there about 4 years now. So really have been kind of able to see some of that strategy through and communication through. But one of the things, that is important to me is that we, make it very clear that we can't do everything on our own. We're one piece in a really, really, really big value chain. And so it's okay to know, hey, we can't make all of this progress on the circular economy or on recyclability of our products or different things without those partnerships and organizations and knowing where we need help. And the only way, sometimes that we can do that and communicate through that is, having that narrative and having that story and going out to different organizations and joining those working groups and having those conversations. And so that's something that I hope that companies are able to continue to do, work with each other to really make that progress, but also really share, the pluses and minuses of what we're trying to do, because we definitely got some big challenges, but how do we really work through those for sure?
And so Harold, again, you at EDF, EDF came of age in the 80s at the point when the narrative was the other way, DDT, PCBs, and the like. Does that feel like history now? Or do you think this is going to be normalized through the environmental movement? Or do you feel it's still a tough fight?
Well, yeah, these are some great questions. Definitely feel like it's still a tough fight, right? My definition of sustainability is really, decreasing waste and pollution so that the future is livable, right? So that the next generation has a unique opportunity. And I think what's great that all of us work for like global and large organizations is we don't have to do the work by ourselves. Even more specifically, my work at EDF, I work closely on air pollution as well as electric vehicle deployment and adoption. But there's tons of other staff scientists and economists and program managers on my team who work in the climate, energy, ecosystems, health, ocean, space. So that gives us a unique opportunity to attack and have projects around sustainability that aren't limited to, again, just my individual goals and individual projects. But one thing that maybe I'll highlight that I'm most excited about working on is the push for zero emission vehicles. We've seen an impact on transportation emissions, on short-lived climate pollutants, on air pollution exposure specifically. And what's most unique is a lot of brands that we work with. So it'd be interesting to actually follow up with Zach and Taylor, because we know that medium heavy duty trucks are having a large impact on diesel emissions and transportation pollution and health in frontline communities. We've more so seen an uptake in e-commerce since the pandemic. The convenience of being able to shop from home. I'm sure most of us are guilty of having an Amazon Prime account. But we don't realize that a lot of those fulfillment centers and warehouses are in communities, low wealth communities. So when you see an uptake in that e-commerce, you essentially see an uptake in air pollution on the communities that live, work, and play and pray around those facilities. So with that being said, from the sustainability lens, I'd love to have opportunity to speak more on it and actually collaborate with some of the 30 to the under 30 honorees on ways that we can push for zero emission, medium heavy duty Class 8 trucks in some of these communities. The data shows that these trucks will rival passenger vehicles leading into 2030, going on to 2050. So again, just excited for that opportunity, but I'm often overwhelmed, by some of the challenges, like most of us, but am optimistic and to say that we have great people like Taylor and Zach and great people among our EDF team that are working on so many different cross-cutting issues.
So this circles back to Greenbiz's honorees and this lineage or cohort that's building from each year. And a question I've been asking increasingly when I have people on a show who come from sort of diverse points of view on something, or hear different parts of different industries or environmental groups. And it's, what can we do together? What can we actually talk about doing, like actually doing next week or next month together, that we can't do as well individually? And, I used to be a writer mostly, right? I'm defined as a journalist doing stuff like this 1988 global warming story. And what I try to do more and more these days is think about communication innovation more in the function of driving conversation, connecting people who would never otherwise be connected. So before we close out here, I know, Heather, you got to go a little bit early. Can we talk about something we could do, actually? I'm building a new newsletter / dispatch that's going to come out starting in another week or two. Even that, though, is going to be more about conversation than telling stories. So, Heather, Greenbiz is there's probably, I know there are networks like within academia. There's of sustainability education. I assume there's big networks of sustainability drivers within industry, including what you create. But what can we do more of there that could make this work even better?
Well, one thing I'm doing in about 20 minutes is I am getting this cohort together so that they can talk about ways that they might be able to network. As Harold was just suggesting, I think as an event organization or a media organization, that is probably the biggest role I could play as a connector. But one thing that my editorial team is also really focused on is you made a point early in the program about journalism and the lack of diversity in journalism. And that's one thing that our team is working on, is to go out and find diverse voices that have a perspective in environmental justice, and to help amplify those voices. And so that's a specific thing I'm doing. And we are looking of ways we're going to take direction from this group as far as how we can help them connect and facilitate those connections. Because talking about what works and doesn't work is so important for accelerating everything, helping companies build off of each other and learn from each other. We have a network at the executive level that does that, but my goal is to help that happen at this level, at this cohort level. So, well,
several things come to mind for me, and I've seen the eagerness that Harold just articulated for crosstalk is always there, and I wonder. The two things that come to mind. One is north-south crosstalk, just a shorthand for going down the supply chain. Is there a way to make these conversations include someone in Cameroon or in Myanmar? Depending on where those supply chains go. I know that's probably a big challenge for industries to build this conversation that way too. And the other one is. The other idea is to get it into classrooms to satisfy that point I think Harold also made about he only becoming aware of possibilities through one teacher. I think it was it you, Harold, who said that, or someone?
A couple of you said that.
Yeah, we're talking about having exposure to the idea that there's even the potential for jobs like this comes in classrooms, and there is this I've written and had events with a woman in science named Sarah McNulty, who was the founder of something called Skype a Scientist. And it's a way for scientists working in the field or just doing interesting stuff to connect with schools so that kids can have a sense of how science works. This was way before COVID, way before. And now they're like going into overload mode with the idea that each of you could be in classrooms, today, not during the summer, but fairly routinely devoting 20 minutes of time to connect with kids. So those are two things: down the supply chain and into school systems. Does that make sense? Maybe Taylor.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's definitely, I think, really connecting, especially as we're thinking about kind of the younger generation. For some, the three of us are the younger generation, but now looking, even more, kind of downstream of, the next ones who were really leaving kind of this profession to, but also this world too. And so that's something, and it seems like a lot of, colleges and universities are getting on board with that. When I was at Duke University, they had a similar program to the one that you mentioned of really kind of trying to get environmental educators in the classroom for younger students. But I think it's something that, kind of gets lost once we get in that professional world sometimes. And so kind of how do we bring that back? Especially now in the virtual world, there's sometimes that disconnect, I think, with the environment. So how do we bring that kind of curiosity back to students, but also open them up to the big environmental field as well?
And Zach, on that north-south question, north, south, east, west, how do you build the conversations in that dimension, as well as sort of laterally among SDG kind of, professionals, I'd call it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is such huge opportunity for collaboration, the north-south collaboration, like down the supply chain with our suppliers, and then also, I guess, east-west collaboration within our industries, like who we maybe would typically consider a competitor, or even companies within other industries. And as an example, I'll bring it back to this idea of regenerative agriculture. We're seeing so many opportunities get unlocked as we engage further down our supply chains with the farmers and communities in these areas that we really want to shift our relationship with, which used to be more of like just a typical supplier relationship. Maybe we'd be more of like an overseer of, oh, you have to do this sustainable thing to get into our supply chain, to now thinking of it much more of a partnership and an uplifter, and getting shared value from what goes on at the farm level in terms of regenerative impacts on the environment and the communities, and into our supply chain. So huge opportunities being unlocked there in terms of the storytelling that we can do from that, the benefit we can deliver down at that level, and the benefit we derive from it as well in terms of just a resilient supply chain. We're looking at things like longer term contracts with farmers, which is something that really has never been done before, like 10-year contracts with regenerative wool growers. And we have some of that in our parent company supply chain right now. We're looking at how we replicate that with these other new regenerative systems. So I think that's one thing. And then the other piece that I'm really excited about is this idea of like collaboration across companies in our industry and with like very unlikely collaborators. We're seeing tons of room or opportunity to collaborate with the food industry specifically, especially where both of our supply chains intersect with agriculture, and especially where regenerative agriculture really relies on a diversity of plants and animals on a farm. So there's such a big opportunity for all of the end customers of those plants and animals coming together and joining forces to help scale that regenerative transition and then offtake the different materials in the end. So we have like really cool conversations going on with, like, for example, we're working on a regenerative rubber project in Thailand, and in a regenerative rubber tree system, you really need to have diverse intercropping to kind of mimic the biodiversity of the rainforest and bring the health to the soil. And so we're seeing that like rubber can be intercropped with coffee or cocoa, and there's opportunities that we could collaborate with big players in the coffee or cocoa space. And then same thing, we have a regenerative sugarcane project going on in Brazil, and we use the non-edible portion of the sugarcane, but we're having really cool conversations with companies that use sugar in their food products, like ice cream companies and beverage companies, that we could collaborate with. And then, of course, with leather, there's tons of opportunity to collaborate with the meat industry, so that when we come to farmers, we can offer a benefit in terms of the premium we pay on the leather. But if we come to the table with the meat industry as well, and they're also saying, we're aligned, we want this, we can offer a premium on the meat, we're seeing that we're able to just accelerate those conversations and scale so much quicker. So yeah, I'm really excited for the conversation that Heather's hosting in a few minutes, and just talking with the rest of the group and finding other opportunities for collaboration.
And Harold, I know environmental groups have played a critical role in facilitating crosstalk of that kind, or at least measuring, adding the credibility factor. Rainforest Alliance my friend Daniel Katz, who I met in the 80s when I was writing my book on the rubber tappers of the Brazil, the burning season. And I learned a lot about rubber at that time. The Rainforest Alliance has gone on to do a lot of sort of certification and in citrus and bananas and all kinds of things, coffee. So environmental groups are part of that conversation for sure. Yes. Is there some frontier there that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, one thing I'll just add is, I think what's most important in our work is really that science translation piece. So how do we get conversations around circular economy and SGD and ESG and all of the acronyms into some of the rooms of communities, right? You mentioned school students and how that's important and relevant, but volunteering our time outside of our professional settings, whether that's in academia, nonprofit, industry, but actually spending that time to increase quote unquote lay users, right? I've had the opportunity to do like several trainings, outside of my professional network with community-based organizations, with different school systems, to introduce them to topics around hyperconsumption of goods, around climate change, around air pollution monitoring, around air quality, around energy efficiency, because this is an opportunity where we raise the quality of life and opportunity for those groups to thrive and succeed. And it's not enough, right? It's often, I feel like we're singing to the choir when we're at the various conferences or in similar forums like this, but we want to make sure that there's a unique opportunity for these type of topics to be shared with the community groups and with the individuals who need to hear it. I like to call it like raising our green literacy, and so that they have the technical acumen to be in the city council meetings, making the case for what's significant and what's important. I remember having a unique opportunity of actually working in city government on a volunteer basis. And one thing I learned is that people and our politicians don't get excited when there's one person talking about a specific issue, right? But when individuals come in large numbers and again have that technical acumen and green literacy on specific issues to raise the point on why air quality is significant in their community, then our politicians lend the ear and usually make some policies and have an impact on improving that well-being in that specific community. So that's the point I'll leave on, is just how do we have these same and similar conversations with a lot of these frontline groups so that they have the will and the energy to have these unique conversations with outside of our immediate circles, and it's not us singing to the choir.
Yeah, that's so great. Thank you so much for that portrait. I'm hoping that the honorees can stay on for just another couple of minutes. Heather has to pop off to get ready for your convening.
Yeah.
It's great that we can convene this, and I'm committed to following up. Maybe in a couple of months we could do another session to help push forward the conversation and broaden it. So Heather, thank you for being here. So just for you all, I think, to me, looking at these challenges, as I showed that slide earlier of the complexity of SDGs, one of the things, along with the narrative, that I think can flip between the 19th and 20th century and the 21st and maybe 22nd century is, as you were saying, toward regeneration, pro-generation, building things new, using technology and community to push things forward, and maybe letting go of numbers a little bit. We're all in a world of numbers. As journalists, we pay attention to numbers, in corporate world for sure. But a lot of what you're driven by is your values. And it's hard to measure those things. It's hard to say, oh, our company has X values. But I think that shift within companies, just as an observer, is really important. I'm just going to show one last set of super quick slides and get your reaction as a going away moment. So here we go. When the Pope came to New York City during the Sustainable Development Goals launch, there was a meeting on civilization and climate, and a longtime sustainability analyst Heriberto Cabezas gave a very detailed engineering style analysis using very sophisticated models of sustainability. Is it possible through the next 200 years? And his conclusions look suitably PowerPointy, lots of bullet points. The last one here really caught my eye. Coordinated manipulation of at least 6 variables is necessary to maintain stability for 200 years or so. And I was like, oh my God, the world I know doesn't work that way. There's no master builder with knobs. This coordination is loose and evolutionary, and it involves prodding from environmental groups and some movement, but it's not like that. And so I raised my hand and I said to him that this just doesn't feel like the world I know. And he said this: we lack a cultural narrative that says sustainability is really important. We have a cultural narrative that says murder is wrong. We don't have a narrative that says managing our planet in a way that allows us to live on it as long as we can is probably the most important thing. And that was a big deal for me. It resonates with me always, because it says that to some extent, this is about letting go of numbers and building a culture with transparency, accountability that points in a certain direction. And I don't know if you have your own sense, just before we break, of what drives you forward more, the numbers or the culture? And is that something that can spread too? And maybe just from top down, Harold, Zach, and Taylor.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a mix of both for me. Naturally, growing up in the STEM discipline, your taught numbers are important, right? Or if you're off by a certain contingency, it could have a large impact on some result. But the human-centric design and human-centric elements of a lot of our work being in the environmental space undoubtedly shows why it's important that we have this more cultural narrative, right? That ultimately sustainability and environmental sustainability is important and significant for managing our planet. So that's my short way of saying that it's a mix of both, and I've tried to incorporate it in a lot of my work, and moving forward as I continue to be involved in some of the sustainability initiatives at EDF. We're again leaning more toward these human-centered design elements of our work, and making sure that outside of our organization, that the voices of the communities that are most impacted are a part of our staff and are heard and a part of that decision-making process.
And Zach?
Wow. Yeah, that's such a thought-provoking quote there. I feel like you could take that to such deep levels, even like your own personal beliefs and spirituality type thing. But what comes to mind first is similar to what Harold said, just that, I don't think it's either or necessarily, but I think it presents itself as an either or only because our time horizon and scope for like measuring the numbers is too limited. But if we were to actually like expand that, which maybe it's just like beyond our capability of doing because it's so complex, I do believe that like those things would come together. And I think just that like both, so like in terms of when you see the value of the numbers, like what time horizon you're looking at, and then also like who is value being created for? Is it just you when you're kind of looking at the numbers, or is it more like your community or global community? And then the feedback loops of how when you bring more value to your community, that value comes back to you. Like, I just think it's so complex, but if I just do believe that those things with the right scope actually align.
It's great. It's going to take work, including internal work within companies, universities, and other structures, media too. We don't tell that story. And Taylor, the final word from you. I know you have to jump into the meeting, so it's great to have you here.
Yeah. I think, kind of closing that quote kind of made me think of a similar one, which is really, when we heal the world, we kind of heal ourselves, and then the other way around, kind of working on those social pieces or really finding those intersections and, maybe making the environment or climate or nature, something that's more personal and intrinsic to humanity rather than something that is, very science and numbers based, is something that's going to be very important. So excited to see, you know, kind of where we lead that next generation and kind of continue that work. But I definitely think, you know, there's some good points to think about of how can we make this something that's more tangible, and keep that going forward, so it doesn't seem like something that's out of reach. Especially, you know, given our limited time here, hopefully there's so much more left. And so that we're able to continue and sustain that change by making that kind of big cultural change, probably the biggest cultural change that we'll see. But hopefully we can play our part in that, and bring the next generation along.
That's great. Well, thank you all for being here today, and Heather also. And we give our best wishes to your on the other honoree who had to deal with her dog having an emergency. I'll leave you with one last glimpse of another invaluable message. My brother spent time in Paris in college, and he was a big fan of The Little Prince, which many of you have. And this line, it's about the intangibles, the things we don't measure, not neglecting them because we can't measure them. And the fox told the little prince, it's only basically that which is essential is invisible to the eye. And sometimes within a company or a culture or university, that which is essential is also invisible to the eye. It's about culture, connectivity, and you're all demonstrating that here today. So that's a wrap. We'll come back, please. Try to reconvene this cluster down the line if we can, and learn. I want to learn more for sure about the rubber, that intersectional work with rubber and farming. That's something I can follow up with right away. Thanks again for being here, Taylor Price, Zach Angelini, Harold Rickenbacker, and Heather Clancy from Greenbiz. As soon as we're done, this will be available on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and shareable. So let's sustain the conversation that way too. Be well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.